Hello, I'm Eric Snodgrass, Principal Atmospheric Scientist at Nutrient Ag Solutions, and I want to thank you for giving me your time today as we talk a little bit about the weather here for Farm Credit Illinois. Let's dig in by taking a look back at the difference between what we've seen so far this year and last year. So this map, wherever you see blue, that shows you where from the time period of March 1st through June 1st, 2019 was wetter. We can see throughout much of the United States, 2019 was a much wetter month. But as we look a little bit closer at the state of Illinois, take a look at this. There are a few pockets in here where things are red, and that's because of some early spring heavy rainfall. And then we saw a lot in April and even pockets of heavy rainfall in the month of May. But overall, across the state, there's a lot more blue here indicating that 2019 was the wetter start to the year. But it's not exactly been the driest start for a lot of folks. Now, where is the drought? Well, when we look at the latest drought monitor released at the end of the month of May, we were still watching the high plains, but not a lot of this drought had really spread a great deal of a distance toward the east, and that's where we would start to get concerned. Some places that we have some drought right now, like in parts of the Dakotas, Minnesota, and there's still even a few pockets living in parts of Iowa and Wisconsin. The drought that's in those areas has largely been relieved by the first week of June's precipitation and some end of May precipitation as well. So when we look back over the last 30 days, this is what our percent of normal precipitation looks like, and we really examine this map to see where we've got flooding and where conditions are quite dry. Now, with that as a backdrop as to where we're going, take a look at this. This map shows you from January 1st to June 1st for each climate division where we are ranking in terms of total precipitation. And if you just look here across the state of Illinois, we can see that many of our districts are quite wet so far this year up until this point in the year. Now, that sets me up for really what I want to discuss for the rest of this video. Is there any chance that we go away from this wet pattern and get dry as we now move into the middle part of summer? In the near term, the answer to that is no. This is a look here at the next week's worth of precipitation as forecast by the WPC. And what we're really going to be concerned about here is some early week thunderstorms, but then we're going to be seeing some tropical moisture coming up out of the Gulf of Mexico from a storm system called Cristobal. And this is what precipitation looks like when you compare it to normal. So we can see that we're talking, possibly 1 to 2 inch surplus of water coming up here into Illinois, with the northern plains stretching all the way back into the Canadian prairies also getting a pretty healthy drink as the jet stream favors upper level divergence. That's where the upper level is allowed to exhaust air upwards in that area. So here's the latest I have on Cristobal. It's taken its dear sweet time. It's going to be a full 5 days here before it gets into the lower Mississippi River Valley. And right now, the National Hurricane Center is keeping its strength at tropical storm status. In the background of that map, though, is the European model forecast, which again takes it just to the west of the Mississippi River right into the state of Illinois, or the remnants of it into the state of Illinois. And this is what the GFS does. The GFS kind of stalls things out here over parts of Texas and Louisiana, but then moves it over toward the Ohio River Valley. We could still get some heavier precipitation out of this one as well. So we got to keep an eye on the tropics this time of year, and I'll tell you, with the weak La Nina that's brewing, this will be a year that the tropics have a better chance at being above average in terms of activity. Now, as we stretch this out and answer that question, what are we getting at the end of the month of June? What are we looking at for July? I'll tell you this. In the near term, I got the GFS over here on the left and the European over here on the right. What I don't see is a blocked pattern. What I don't see is a jet stream bunched up. What I don't see is meridional flow, north-south flow. It's all open, and there's a lot of waves moving through. And what that gives us is kind of a period to the weather. In other words, it comes in warm and dry, and then we come back in with some more rain. And as long as that keeps up, we're looking at a great growing season here. Now, because there's a little bit of model disagreement, as we look out here toward the middle of the month, the GFS model is a bit more aggressive with northern plains into the north, central, and central Corn Belt, as you can see here. The European model favors a little bit drier pattern overall, but still, this will be coming after we get the precipitation that comes out of the tropics here. So we're going to watch it all very carefully kind of pull together here as we work our way toward mid-month. One of the most important things is that all the extreme heat that we saw here at the beginning of June in the midsection of the country, and this is just looking at a forecast 5 days from June 3rd to June 8th, we can see that heat there in the middle section of the country. Well, watch this. By the time we move our way toward the middle of the month, from the 8th through the 13th, we start to see that heat subside, and instead we go over to much more seasonable weather as it gets cooler along the west coast of the United States. This is that open moving pattern. But we would expect then that we would go back over to some warm anomalies at some point. And we can see here as we stretch this all the way out to the 19th of the month, or the 18th of the month, that we start to see some warmer air that begins to return to the midsection of the country. Now, we would love it if it did that. Just bring the heat on, drop it off with some wetter weather and some clouds, and bring it back on again. That's great for our crops. So let's look out longer. The maps on the top here are for week 3. So this would be the 3rd week of June. And down here, I have week 4, which would be the end of June, beginning of July. Models agree that our chances of having a warm start to the summer are really in the cards. But look at the week on, week off pattern to this. You can see that as we work out into week 3, we still see near average, maybe very slight dry bias. There will be a lot of thunderstorms activity going on here. That's the thunderstorm symbol, by the way. So there's going to be a lot of hit or miss storms, which is very typical. But as we get out to the end of June and early July, we start to see the models picking back up on a wetter pattern. And the big question I'm asking myself, and the one you should be asking of me, is, do I believe it? Do I buy into it? So let me give you a couple of points here, okay? For hot and dry weather to really return at the end of June and the start of July, what must happen, okay? I'm going to put this out there first. I do not think that right now the summer is going to be bringing any sort of long duration extreme heat. We'll get short spells of hot weather. That's very typical of summer. And we'll even have some flash drought conditions that show up. But the kind of long duration extreme heat that we saw, in 2012 and years like 2005, 2002, years like that, I don't see it necessarily in the cards. But any ill-timed heat and drought, especially during pollination, has got to be watched. So from an atmospheric scientist perspective, if we are going to go over to that pattern, what must happen? Slow the jet stream, move it north, put a big ridge over the Aleutian Islands, and a trough west. If there's a trough west, we get a ridge in the middle part of the country, and if it sits over the Great Lakes, we are hot and dry. To get that to happen, you got to crank up the trade winds. We got to slow down this thing called the Mag-Julian oscillation. We got to slow down our global winds and get this quasi-biennial oscillation to break its trend. Now, I'm going to spare you some of the details and get right to the main point. I went back and I researched for the primary Corn Belt, of which Illinois sits right in the middle. The years where April, May, and June were wet, like we had this year, but then July, August, September were dry. And I found these years where the numbers were well above average. That means those are the years where it was wet through June, and then hot for the rest of summer. I said, what was it about those years? Well, we know what to expect. You see, in June of those years, which you can read off here, the jet stream was doing this. Big ridge in the Gulf of Alaska, and a trough that came into the west and then raced here over a ridge over the Great Lakes, well, really over the northeast. That gave us southwest flow and plenty of open Gulf of Mexico moisture and a vigorous upper level of the atmosphere. Now take a look at this. In the August that followed, this is what the jet stream did. It shifted. Now the trough was in the Gulf of Alaska, and the ridge was over Wisconsin, and that shut off the Gulf and brought in the heat. So it's these years. You can see them down there at the bottom. So what you want to watch is right in through here and right in through here. That is where I've just colored over the pockets where the jet stream is fastest normally. Now take a look at this. Those years, those hot, dry years that were wet in spring, they featured slow winds here and slower winds there. See that? So the big question is there anything forecasting that for the month of July? Well, right now, we know that as we work our way to mid-June, those winds right now in the reds here are forecast to be fast. Red is faster than normal, blue is slower than normal. And look at this, by the time we get to the middle of June, June 18th, they're still fast. That's why mid-June is not featuring extreme heat, okay? Question is, does this last? And to answer that question, I want to show you a few things. We do right now have a weak La Nina. Now, recently, what's happened is that La Nina, inside that oval there, the temperatures dropped off and then they kind of bounced back up. We, for a little while, saw a stronger westerly wind burst with our trade winds still cranked in this direction. Remember, big, strong La Ninas, they're cold all through this area. We don't have that. And the trade winds are often very, very strong and out of the west. We don't have that quite yet either. But I've noticed we've warmed up the oceans here, and there's been a little bit of cooling in the North Pacific, but it's still much above average. If we wanted to see extreme heat last all summer, I'll draw it for you again, this whole area I'm kind of shading in white would need to go over cold, and we don't see that just yet. Now, given that, I want to show you what could possibly be a good analog here. You see, I have up here the forecast for July 2020, and I went back and researched this and looked through all the years, and I found that July 2016 matches July 2020 pretty well. You can see the two patterns there, one in the past, 2016 on the bottom, and then one in the future here, July 2020. And given those correlations, look how closely tied they are together. This is what happened in summer 16. It was hot up the coasts. It was warm overnight for the whole of the United States, but very warm up the coast with near average daytime high temperatures in the midsection of the country. Why? Look at where the jet stream was. It's the blue line that you see right over here. These were several lines, and you can go back and compare the years on the average position of the jet stream in the month of July, going back to 1948. And what you notice is 2016's jet stream pattern. The ridge was back west, and the flow was farther south. And that gave us a whole lot more lower atmospheric pressure in this area and opened up the Gulf to give us thunderstorms. And as a result, we were wet in through here while it was hot and dry up the coasts. This could possibly be one of our stronger analogs as we look forward into this forecast. It is certainly why the latest model runs from the ECMWF, the 7 models in the National Multi-Model Ensemble, and the Climate Prediction Center are all trying to keep June, July, August wet for this region. Now, we're going to get brand new updates from all of these modeling centers in the second week of July. So we need to see how much they transition. But the most recent runs right now suggest that it's going to be a wet and warm summer. Warm, here's the temperatures. You can see that even though the CPC has equal chances in here, look at the NMME, keeping slight warm bias, and we can see the warmth that's in the ECMWF that's west slowly migrating a little bit to the east as well. So I'm going to bring you to one last slide here. What could make all of this wrong? Well, this morning I watched a webinar from one of the best researchers in the world on subseasonal forecast. I've been studying this for months trying to understand it. But we're measuring this new quantity called the global atmospheric angular momentum. It's been very high going back to January. But a year ago, it fell off in July and fell off again in September. And this drop here gave us some drought in the state of Illinois. Right now, it sits here, still above zero. What I want everybody to be watching with me is to see if this value drops. Because if it does, that would be an indication that the upcoming summer does have the potential to flip from a wet spring over to a hot and dry summer. What would I give it an odds of right now? Probably about 55-45, okay? It's so many moving pieces at this point, and given the fact we don't have drought across the state, normal thunderstorm activity could save the day. But do anticipate some flash drought situations, which is typical of every summer, and also anticipate maybe some brief hot spells. That's what we're looking at right now. So let's watch it together. I hope you all took something away from this, and I hope you have the best growing season, all right? Have a good one. We'll talk to you again soon. Thank you.